Hello and welcome to episode 2 of How to Roleplay Star Trek Adventures. Today we are going to talk about the game mechanics and we'll dive a little bit in the underlying math and statistic. Don't worry, it is not going to be too complicated, is what every single math teacher says before he throws some weird stuff at you. In this video, hopefully you're definitely not going to need any knowledge of quantum mechanics, but it wouldn't help. No, just kidding. We're going to talk first over about how to make checks and how tests are done in Star Trek Adventures, and in the second part we'll talk a little bit about success chances. Reason for this is the mechanics on how to roll dice are not super intuitive, and it's not always immediately clear how likely you are to succeed on a given task given your character's stats. For the first part, there will be barely any math involved. It's just how to roll dice, what to do, and why to do it. The second part, there is a little bit of math involved. So if that's an issue, just skip the second part. It's only a few minutes anyways. All right. Tests and checks are used in role-playing games whenever your character attempts something that might work out or might fail. For instance, you landed your ship in a rough manner and now need to do some repairs, or there are enemies and the shooty started, and you try to find out if your character hits the enemy and then does some damage. So whenever that happens, what you do is you play rock, paper, scissors with the GM. No, of course, you usually roll dice or sometimes draw cards, depending on the role-playing system. The way you roll dice and see what is going to happen in Star Trek Adventure is as follows. The GM determines a difficulty for the task. This can be something usually between 0 and 5, where 0 is a task that you will definitely achieve. It's just the question of how well you're doing this. And 5 is something extremely difficult. Then the GM will tell you which attribute and discipline are being used for the task. They will determine the actual target number you need to roll. There will also be a brief discussion probably about which focus can be used. We're not going to grand detail on the focuses. And then the number of d20s that you are going to roll is determined. You roll the dice and see if you succeed. I'll give you an example for this. Let's say your character, the small one is a little playful right now. Let's say your character wants to repair the engine of your starship. So the GM says, well, there is some damage there, so let's say the difficulty is 2. And for the repair, you will use reason and engineering. So you take the numbers for reason and engineering, add them up, 7 and 2 in this case, and the result, 9, will be the target number for your rolls. You need to roll 9 or less to succeed. The number of d20 is 2 plus whatever you want to buy in addition. You have resources that you can spend in order to buy additional d20s. Those are momentum, determination, and threat. I'm just skimming over this because I'm not going to explain the entire content of the core books, but just for brevity's sake, momentum is something you can build up during a scene by succeeding very well on tasks or by aiding one another, for instance. Determination is something akin to fate points, hero points, or whatever they're called in different systems. It's a resource that every character has individually at the start of each game session. And threat is something you might know from several board games where certain actions of the players will give the opponent threat tokens that they then can use to strengthen monsters and something like this. This is a similar mechanic here in Star Trek Adventure. So you check out how important it is to succeed on this task, and then spend resources accordingly. And then you roll all the dice in your pool, and each 9 or less is a success. Since the difficulty is 2, you will need 2 or more successes to repair the engine. Now you might notice it's rather difficult to achieve more than 2 successes in this manner, but for this there are further mechanics. This is rather swift. One mechanic you might know from Dungeons and Dragons, Pathfinder, and so on. There is a critical roll. It's not a net 20 as in Pathfinder and D&D 5th edition, but the one, if you roll a natural 1, then you obtain not 1 success but 2 successes. Same goes if you can use a focus. If one of your focuses applies to the task at hand, you will, when you succeed, always get 2 successes. In our case, since I wanted to repair an engine, I don't have an applicable focus, but if the task was instead about dancing, I don't know why reason engineering would require dancing, but if that would have been the case, I would have the chance with 2 dice to obtain up to 4 successes. Now, as we established in our example, with 2 dice I usually get about up to 2 successes, not counting for focuses and net 1s. That means obtaining 5 or even 4 successes going for a difficulty 4 to 5 task is extremely unlikely to happen. So I'm probably relying on those resources, momentum, determination, or threat. The probably most important one is momentum, because it affects the way the game is played. One important way to obtain momentum is working together. In a classical combat situation, in lots of role-playing games, you will find yourself in a scenario like this. There are 3 enemies and 3 player characters, so everyone is firing at their own personal Klingon. Now, Star Trek Adventure does a different approach, similar to what you might know from games like Fate. Now, assume you don't have 3 Klingons, but one particularly big one. The way you would probably fight this super Klingon in Star Trek Adventure would be one of your crewmates tries to distract him by grappling him. The next one tries to keep him from dodging your attacks by tying his shoelaces together, and only the third guy is actually firing at the Klingon. This way, the team members work together to build up momentum to make the attack more likely to succeed. And in fact, it's this mechanic will probably lead to a situation where it's better to work together in this manner rather than 3 guys shooting at the same Klingon separately, because then all 3 are very likely to miss and do nothing at all. Obviously, this mechanic is more predominant on the bridge of your starship, where one person might be scanning an asteroid, the next one is preparing a probe that enhances the transporter beam, so that the third person, the tactical officer for instance, can then do his task of beaming the stranded survivors from below the surface of an asteroid. And this works because people are working together, build up momentum, and then only one big dice roll is one big test is rolled in order to see if this working together actually saved the day. That was the part about how to roll dice. Now let's do the math very briefly and check out how success chances can be calculated in Star Trek Adventure and how it compares to other games you might be more comfortable with. Why is it even relevant? Why do we need to know, or like, do we need to have a feeling about success chances? Well, as a player, you need to know how likely it is that your character succeeds on a task, how competent your character is, how difficult a task is. Can my character jump over a gap, or is this insane? The GM has told me about a difficulty or target number. Is it reasonable to even attempt this, or is this a waste of time or energy? And the GM, of course, needs to know what are reasonable difficulties. What is too difficult? What is too easy? So before we go into math, let's just compare Star Trek Adventure to something many people are quite used to, single D20 system like Pathfinder, like D&D. Here we usually have the GM set a target number for a task. It could be armor class of a monster, it could be a target number for climbing a wall. The player then calculates the modifier according to the character sheet, the attack modifier or the skill modifier, whatever it is. And then the number the player needs to roll on a d20 is target number minus the modifier. Relatively straightforward. In Star Trek Adventure, if I just look at a single die, it looks actually relatively similar. We have a target number which is not set by the GM, but given by our attribute and discipline involved. The GM, of course, determines which attribute discipline is used. There are no modifiers, so my required roll is the attribute discipline or lower. Relatively easy, but also kind of similar, just with the difference that I need to roll low in Star Trek Adventure and high in D&D. Now, where the two systems differ a bit more is in the success chances. The calculation of success chances in single D20 systems like D&D or Pathfinder is fairly easy. You can do it in your head. It looks a little bit arcane written down, but it's not as difficult once you understand it. It's 21 minus the required roll times 5%. Sounds a little bit weird, but if you put numbers in there, it becomes very apparent. Let's say my target number is 17, so I have to roll 70 or higher. That means 21 minus 17 is 4. 4 times 5%, so it's 20%. Right. An even easier example would be target number of 11. That would be then 21 minus 11 is 10. 10 times 5% is 50%. Right. It's half of the numbers are success, half of the number are a failure. Very simple. You can also think of a d20 as each number corresponds to 5% chance. Rolling h20 is a 5% chance, just as rolling exactly 1. So rolling 19 or higher, 2 times 5% chance, 10%, so 10% chance, and so on and so forth. Now in Star Trek Adventures, it's a little bit more complicated, and not often can you do this math in your head. So for the single die, it's super easy. It's the required roll times 5%, because we roll lower than the target number. We don't have to do this 21 minus and so on and so forth. So that is fairly easy. Trouble is, we don't roll just one die. If that chance of success for a single die is P, then the average number of successes that we get from one dice pool of whatever number of dice is P times the number of dice. In an example, if I have to roll 10 or less, the target number is 10, and I have 4 dice, then it's 50% times 4 is 2 successes. That is a very, very simple example, one of the few examples you can easily do the math in your head, but picture a chance per dice of let's say 35%. That would be a target number of 7. And you have, I don't know, 6 dice. How many successes do you have on average? Can you do the math in your head? If so, well done. If not, well, that's kind of the issue here. So it is not always immediately super clear on how likely you are to accomplish a task. That is a downside, right? But there is an upside here. In Pathfinder and D&D, you quite often end up in a situation that can be very frustrating for a player. That is, you have a very high chance of success. You're a rogue and you have put lots of points in stealth, lots of feats and whatever, and you only have to roll a 4 or higher, but you roll a 1. So these type of freak rolls can be really frustrating, and it's because each check is done by just 1 die. In Star Trek Adventure, you roll several dice, which gives you a better statistical average. There might be a 20 in one of the rolls in your check, but it's very unlikely that all of the rolls will be 20. So Star Trek Adventure in this regard gives you better average over the chances of success and failure, makes it a bit more fair and less reliable on freak rolls, or less vulnerable to freak rolls. But the downside is, the math is barely ever easily done in your head. You have to spend some time to get used to that. I hope you enjoyed this video. That was it from my side. We will be talking on character generation in the next video. Until then, I hope you have a nice day and see you then. Goodbye.